It's very easy to start a brand online. Very, very, very hard to scale a brand online. Profit and growth are not at odds with each other. I think the next decade is about India and brands. I think there will be 100+ brands that are north of 800 crores that will get created. I, by the way, think valuations are immaterial. I think what matters is value creation. By the way, offline and online need to coexist. The key is not to die and keep compounding.
Thank you so much, everyone. Warm welcome to this evening. It's a pleasure to have you all. It's a very special day for us at TimesBridge. Like Ashwin mentioned, we've had many mixers in past in Mumbai, Delhi, but this is the first time in Bangalore. And it's really interesting because I spend a lot of time on Twitter. I'm an ex-Twitter employee. I was part of the early leadership of Twitter in India. And the FOMO about Bangalore is just crazy. It's from struggling to find flats to morning queues at Rameshwaram Cafe to everything that happens in Bangalore makes noise. So there are so many peak Bangalore moments that kind of unfold, and something really interesting. And so as soon as conditions permitted, we basically thought that we must do something in Bangalore. And on a serious note, I think it's really we want to be part of the story. We want to network and we want to be out here and partner with a lot of folks in Bangalore. So here we are. Thank you so much once again, and thank you, Ananth, for taking the time out.
Sure.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I think talking about FOMO, by the way, I think somebody in your office sent me a message saying I have to wear a jacket and come clean shaven. I was wondering what pictures you saw of me that made sure that they actually sent me a message saying both. And I actually responded back saying, do you know you're in Bangalore?
So I was actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because I came to Bangalore and I felt very overdressed and I was just wearing a shirt. But anyway, here we are. I think before we get to the interesting and insight questions, I want to start with something very unique, and probably you answered this question in other forums, but what is it with you and the letter M? You worked with McKinsey, you worked with Myntra, and now Mensa brands. And
I'm from Madras, and I went to the University of Michigan, and before that the University of Madras as well. And no, M has nothing to do with anything. No, it's just purely coincidence, but it seems to be a letter that works. So when we were thinking of the name for the venture on what we were going to do, I think a bunch of us were just brainstorming and said we'll continue with this M theme, and therefore came up with Mensa. So Mensa was the only engineered piece. The rest was all just
destiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so why don't we dive into some questions which I think the crowd is here for. So what's your story? It'll be great to hear your story and how you thought about let's say building Mensa brands. It's a really exemplary company that you built in such a short period of time.
No, thank you. By the way, since we were doing a quiz earlier, a unicorn is a mythical animal, not to be found. Dinosaurs, on the other hand, ruled the earth for a long time. So I'd rather be a dinosaur. Look, I actually started off with consulting. So I worked at McKinsey for many years. I actually did lots and lots of automotive consulting. So if anybody needs any advice on what car to buy, at what depreciation point, etc., I'm quite useful. But I did that for a long time. I did that for 15 years. And then got into fashion, and this, it's completely chance. So I'm a big believer that, a lot of things, 80% of life is luck, including where you're born. So I think a lot of this, in all humility, is just also luck, right? So Myntra for me happened because I happened to meet Sachin and Binny at an awards function. Maybe times is the common thread that runs through all of this, because this was at an ET event, ET 40 under 40 event, which is where I'd first met them. And a year later, they bought Myntra. Flipkart bought Myntra. And Mukesh had actually moved to run the commerce platform, and they were looking for someone to come run Myntra. I was sort of an odd choice because at that point I actually did dress mostly in suits because I had, I think, blue, and if things got really out of hand, black suits. I think I had a BlackBerry but not a smartphone. at that point of time, and I didn't know the difference between knits and wovens for those of you who are in fashion. So it seemed like an unlikely thing to go do, but I actually genuinely enjoyed it. The reason is I'm a big believer that where to play, on a more serious note, matters much more than anything else. And the where to play is the market that you pick. So the reason I decided to do Myntra was actually, even with a little bit of research, it seemed very clear that e-commerce was here to stay. And the reason e-commerce was here to stay is, again, quite simple. India actually doesn't have the amount of modern retail that one needs to, if you think about the GDP growth that's there. And second, if you look at penetration of e-commerce in India, even now it's 7-8%, the US is 17, China is about 24. So it felt like a sort of growth category over the next 10 years, right? The second is, in e-commerce, I still firmly believe this. I think fashion, maybe beauty, and a little bit of home are the categories where you can build profitable businesses. And the reason for that is it's mostly unbranded going to branded, and it's a large gross margin business. So the reason I say this may seem very boring, but the reason I say this is it's actually important to pick the right life is very difficult. So you might as well actually pick the area where you want to hit it. You know, if you're successful, at least it's big. So that's why I did Myntra. And Myntra, you know, was a great experience because we tried to sort of, at least I tried to figure out a way to make it profitable. I was in McKinsey till earlier, right? And, you know, I had not even, this concept of losing money to grow didn't exist. McKinsey was an 80% gross margin business, actually distributed its profits to its partners every year. So losing money every day and doing the math around it, you know, actually troubled me at that point of time. And therefore, thinking about how do you actually make a profitable business was important. Sorry, the reason I say this is I think profit and growth are not at odds with each other. So I did the Myntra piece. We sold very successfully to Walmart. I actually then decided that I would be more entrepreneurial. So took some of the money, invested into a loss-making company, MedLife, where there were no external investors and only the two original founders had put in money. We hopefully turned it around, but learned some lessons along the way, saying it's very hard actually to actually have a loss-making business without external investors. Teaches you quite a lot about cash flow management. And then started Mensa. Very long story, but the reason I started Mensa was, I think if I look at India and brands, the next 10 years, I think multiple $100 million brands will get built in India. I think the way Unilever built brands, the way Inditex built brands, are not the way brands are going to be built now. And so I felt like there was an interesting opportunity to do something. Sorry, long-winded answer, but that's the quick story of.
No, that's a great answer, and it's M for Midas touch again. So, so I think let's maybe dig a bit deeper into that. Like, how do you when you say building brands, right?
Yep.
What do you think is different in?
So I'll tell you there are two vast differences. If you look at the last 50 years of how brands were built and the next 50 years of how brands are going to be built. The first is distribution. So almost everywhere in India, distribution was a three-tiered affair. You had, and the reason for the three tiers, by the way, is mostly credit. So if you look at Unilever's sort of reach, their ability to get to millions of Kirana stores in the end, and therefore reach out to all of India, was remarkable. And that was the real moat. Now for 140 rupees, Myntra, Flipkart, Amazon, Nykaa will deliver your package within 3 days anywhere in the 26,000 pin codes in India that are available. So that's fundamentally changed. Somebody's built the rails, and therefore you can build interesting things on those rails. The second thing is 8% online penetration of sales. But if you look at brand building, I would say north of 50%. I don't know about any of you, but I don't know, when is the last time you went and purchased something where you didn't check online before you went and purchased about either the product or the service? I'd love to see, are there any people who don't research anything online before they go and buy? Show of hands? Okay, only the quiz. Okay. So it's 2 out of a group of maybe 40, right? And that, I think, by the way, 50% of people today research their brands online. Therefore, brand building can be done online. So the two fundamental differences are distribution is democratized and brand building is mostly done digitally. I think those were the two insights to say, can we therefore do brands differently? The third insight is, it's very easy to start a brand online. Very, very, very hard to scale a brand online. Right? It's just really hard. You can build call it between 0 and 100 crore brand. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's very possible, right? But from 100 to 1,000 is a dramatically different game because you have to go from push to pull. You have to actually think about operations the way a platform does, which is what Myntra or Amazon do, because deliveries now start to matter, operations start to matter, technology starts to matter. Therefore, bringing these three insights together, there are, so any guesses from any of you, since actually we had the quiz earlier, I'm just trying to now, I'll do a little bit of my own version. How many brands are there between 10 crores of revenue per year to 100 crore per revenue per year, right? In selling primarily 80% online in fashion, beauty and home in India. Any guesses? 500, okay. Any other guesses? There are no prizes and there is nothing. How many? Less than 500, okay. There are 4,352, right, at last count, which was maybe 2-3 weeks ago, right? So there is a lot of brands in that ballpark, but they don't know how to get to the next level of scale. Here's another question. How many $100 million brands, the rate at which the dollar is going, how many 800 crore brands are there today in India in fashion, beauty and home? More than 800 crores in net revenue. Any guesses? The Mensa guys can't answer. Any guesses? Come on, there is no negative penalties either for answering. 20? Very good answer. 50, okay. 150, okay. I think the closest answer is 20. It's sub 30. It's 27, 28 brands that are in that, right? So if you put all of this together, I think the next decade is about India and brands. I think there will be 100 plus brands that are north of 800 crores that will get created. It's nothing. I mean, just think about the size of this country and the consumption that's actually happening. There'll be multiple $100 million brands. What I think we are trying to do at Mensa is very simple. Could we actually help build 100 great brands which become household names, out of which at least 10 of those become north of $100 million, right? Can we really think about household name brands? Can we build a modern version? Not that I think Unilever is not modern, but I'm saying, can we build a new age digital version of what a Unilever did or what an Inditex did, right? Through tech, through scale up. I think that's really the opportunity we're going after. And I think it's a huge and vast opportunity.
Interesting. This is music to our ears because, we always tell our global partners to think about brand first. And, most of the times they are always like performance driven. And
right.
They're the first time in the world, in India, that they would end up doing brand campaigns, which is again, and then that idea travels to the rest of the world, which is
sure.
Again interesting. But great to hear this and kind of building on that, right? So you mentioned that there is a ceiling right now in the certain 100 crores category. So
yeah.
Do you think this is happening because let's say overall D2C brand as a category,
yep.
It's probably not penetrated very deeply in India? Is that the thing?
No. So firstly, I prefer the term digital first brands. Right? And the reason is, by the way, offline and online need to coexist. I think to build very large brands in India, it's not possible to do so without offline. So I think you have to sort of be tech driven, but you have to make offline and online work. The reason brands don't scale are three things. The first and the easiest reason is talent. It's very hard for a smaller brand to attract the kind of talent that is needed in order to scale a brand, right? And the reason is, it's hard to get performance marketing people. It's hard to get product and technology people. It's hard to get any of these. So talent is probably the single largest reason. And I think if you have a portfolio of brands like Mensa does, the ability to attract talent becomes much, much easier. So that's number one. Number two is expertise, particularly technology. Yeah, I don't know how many of you shop on Myntra? Okay, that's very good. It's good to hear. The Myntra shopping experience is built on a tech platform that basically allows for a simple insight to work, which is consumers of fashion like browsing, not searching. Amazon is a search platform. You're very clear what you want, you search. To build such a tech platform required 800 engineers and a lot of product thinking to get it right. For a D2C brand to scale beyond, especially in fashion, beauty and home, you need to have the same kind of expertise, maybe not the same number of people, to think about what is the platform that you will use and how will you go beyond your Shopify website to basically create a engaging experience for consumers. So technology is hard. The front end of it is hard, but the back end of it is even harder. If you think about supply chain optimization, today Mensa has roughly about 10,000 odd SKUs. 4 large warehouses, maybe 20 smaller ones, to optimize the inventory and figure out from which region who's going to buy what so that regional utilization goes up, right, is just really hard as a problem. You can't solve it in Excel, right? You need a data science person to actually be able to solve it. So technology is the second reason why they don't scale. The third, of course, is capital, right? Because I think, you generate profits, but the profits are not enough to fund your working capital and to fund the investments that are actually needed in order to scale the brand. So the 3 big things that are needed are expertise, technology, and capital. And I think that's a little bit of what Mensa also provides to a standalone brand. And I think it's very hard to afford all of those if you're a single brand. But if you're a portfolio, it becomes easier to afford.
Got it. In terms of consumer trends in India versus, let's say, you work in many countries, where do you see that is going? Like, is the adoption, let's say, there are nuances in India, right? So there's metros, tier 1 towns, and then tier 1 plus and all of that, right? So, and then one also looks at cohorts of audiences in India. Like, so there is one almost global top of the pyramid, and then there are middle tier and then the lower tier. So how do you sort of see that as an opportunity unfold?
Yeah, so I think we are actually poised at a very interesting time in India over the next 10 years. So I started sort of in the consumer internet world mostly end of 2014, early 2015. So I wanted to sort of give you 3 factoids. The first is, in 2015, when a customer first came online, to the time when they first purchased a product was roughly 18 months. You would first come, look at video content, right? You'd sort of surf the web. Then, by the way, you would go on and buy actually railway tickets first, usually, right? Then you would buy simple products, right? And then eventually you'll get to more complex products like fashion or home or whatever else, right? That journey took 18 months. That journey today, from 2015 to now, takes 3 months, right? And part of it is the COVID effect, but part of it is people getting more familiar. So there's one macro trend, which is from the time you get online to the time you shop has dropped dramatically, right? That's one mega trend. The second is the first 100 million customers that sort of came online and shopped were mostly men, mostly English speaking, mostly metro. The next 100 million sort of has started to be a lot more around tier 2, tier 3 cities, more women, more regional languages. And that, by the way, so here's another quiz question. Do you think women or men are better shoppers online? Men. Okay. Why? Why do you think that? They're not confused, okay? They don't return, okay? Yeah, they don't return. Yeah, no, by the way, I think that's all of the reasons that you guys said are absolutely true. The biggest reason, by the way, why there are more men shoppers than women actually is a more basic reason. More men own smartphones, right? Just FYI, that's the single. But the reason, by the way, men are better shoppers is because of a characteristic called lifetime value to cost of customer acquisition, right? After I bought this t-shirt, once this t-shirt fits me, I don't buy another. I mean, I buy multiple colors, but I buy the same t-shirt, right? Actually, therefore, the cost of acquiring a customer like me is the same. And then I keep buying the same thing. Women, on the other hand, actually are very hard because in reality, you actually look for different things every time. So therefore, holding a cohort of women consumers is dramatically harder, right? The reason I tell this is actually, by the way, over time, getting to be successful in making money online is becoming harder and harder, right? Because I think the first 100 million were mostly men buying the same things. And the next 100 million has become a lot more women and a lot more discerning. And therefore you have to work harder to make the consumer experience better to make that happen. So that's the second trend. I think a third interesting trend in my mind is consumers are beginning to connect with brands more emotionally than they did before. And I'll give you an example, right? I think if you look at early internet users, Myntra now, I see a very different thing in Mensa now, so I'll sort of describe the two, right? In Myntra, if you got good products at great value, people would buy, right? Terrific brands, good value, you sort of more or less bought, right? I think if you look at the last 2 years, people want to connect with the brand. They want to know what the brand is about. They want to understand the purpose behind the brand. Now, whether they're willing to pay more for it or not is a different question. But if you're going to be not loyal anyway, right? Or you're going to pay only so much. you might as well get more loyalty. And the way to get loyalty is purpose. So the three big trends are, in my mind, the first is the consumer journey is getting shortened. Second is the kind of customers that are coming on are different and more discerning. And third is brands need purpose. So I think the next 10 years, you could build some very interesting and different brands across all of these areas.
That's a good segue to my next question, which is basically about, as consumers become more discerning, what is the role of, let's say, community building, social media,
Right.
content? How does all of that play?
I'm a big believer that I think content and communities are the way to build brands going forward, because brands happen more in conversations. The reason is actually someone on TV telling you, and particularly a famous actor who's endorsed about 52 items in the 53rd and is saying they really genuinely believe in, no longer sort of appeals, right, to many people. Therefore, actually having your friends talk about it, having a community that you trust talk about it, makes a brand more authentic. Now, I think that sounds great. The problem is economics, right? It's much easier if you have fewer SKUs to run a 20 crore campaign with a certain frequency on TV and make sure the national audience reaches, right? The reality why community-based brand marketing is so hard is because it's so expensive, unless it's authentic, because you can't pay your way through it. Therefore, I think for brands to actually prosper, you need to now have real ownership of communities, and you need to create communities that are authentic, that actually have an ongoing presence where people are talking about it, and the brand conversation is almost incidental. And I think that's going to be the future of how this happens over time.
So are you doing that at Mensa? Like, are you encouraging?
We are. We're also in the process of talking to multiple content and community providers to see whether we can get a partnership with them, right? So I think we'll see, but I think it's a big play for us over the next multiple years.
Interesting. Are you also doubling down on technology? I mean, you mentioned role of technology. How does that?
Yeah, I think it's the single biggest differentiator when you have a large number of brands. You cannot manage the brands unless you have technology, right? Otherwise, because it's a linear game, right? You need more and more people. We have 21 plus brands, 24 to be exact, 2-3 are not announced yet. But, for 24 brands, we have 150 people at Mensa. Right? I mean, we have more people overall in the brands, but 150 people centrally. And the reason we're able to do that is because technology actually works, right? And I'll give you examples of technology. Today, by the way, if you manage 10,000 SKUs and you have a bad review across one of the platforms, you actually get to find out 3 weeks later. That doesn't help you. So how do you actually set up an alert system that makes sure that reviews and ratings, you know what's happening real time, and that allows you to respond? To how do you actually basically have inventory management that basically knows where to place what inventory and how much of it? To how do you actually optimize cost of customer acquisition, right? I mean, it's the age-old problem, right? How much do you spend? How much Google tax and Facebook tax do you want to pay, right? And how do you organically go up? All of these, by the way, are done through tech. And the reason this is important is this creates a moat over the long term. Because as you build these algorithms, as you, for example, get better at pricing, as you get better at reviews and ratings management, that becomes a moat in itself. That becomes very hard for a single brand to be able to compete against, right? So I think tech plays a very central role in how we think about how to grow brands in Mensa.
You turned, a 6 months old company into a unicorn, and recently you guys are become profitable. So just curious, like as a founder, one has to make choices. Certain things you do, some things you don't do.
Yep.
Did you have any conscious calls that you?
I think, by the way, I think experience helps. Going through near-death experiences really helps. So one of the things, by the way, after my midlife experience was I don't want to lose money, right? I don't want to get into a situation where external capital markets dictate my fate, right? And I think that's a philosophical belief. Once you have that, you basically say, look, I have that constraint. I have to optimize within that, right? So that's one big thing, at least for me, right? I, by the way, think valuations are immaterial. I think what matters is value creation. And value creation is when you solve a difficult problem that's hard for others to solve, and you solve it better, right? If you can do that, value creation happens. And if value creation happens, valuation follows. I'm a big believer that actually, if you think about investors in Mensa, investors elsewhere, I think as we have had lots of discussions about governance, board, all of that, right? My big belief is you have to figure out once you take external capital, you have to make sure people make money on it. Your reputation depends on it, right? And your reputation is only as good as your last stint. Nobody else cares, right? So I think valuation for me actually is a outcome, not an input criteria. So focus on value creation and solving difficult problems. Make sure you have a benchmark that says you're not going to be too external markets dependent, which means you can self-sustain the business for 18 months, 24 months. You can ride out a rough spell. And third, always make money for your investors, because I think they will follow, right? If you just, I mean, it seems very simple, right? But if you actually just think about these three things and say systematically, I want to do it. Actually, the way we think about it, I mean, I have a couple of my colleagues here from Mensa as well, right? I think the way we think about it is, look, I mean, we could grow at 300%, but we choose to grow at 60, 70%. That's a choice, because you can actually be EBITDA profitable and not have to burn money. Second, I believe that very, very, very few businesses are network businesses where a winner takes all. There are a few, I mean, for sure, right? We're luckily not in one of them. So therefore, we can grow at our own pace, right? We don't need to sort of become a certain size, because, you know, if we don't, somebody else will take it away, right? So we grow what we think is at a sustainable pace, where we can actually get both profits and growth, right? And then the last thing I would say, by the way, is especially for any founders, would-be founders, you know, entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, I would say ownership matters more than valuation, right? For those of you who have taken money externally, there is something called liquidity preference that people put together. Sorry to get technical, but essentially once you take external money, right, the amount of money that gets put in is the value of the company eventually when something goes wrong, right? So what matters is how much ownership of the company do you have at the end of the day. Because if you're building for the long term, you're not building for a liquidity event. You're building for running this business and creating value over the long term. Therefore, by the way, I would say focus on ownership. Don't necessarily focus on valuation, right? So you have to decide how much money you want, and you have to take as little money as you possibly can to make sure that your business does well, so you're capital efficient. If you sort of just do these things, right, you create great businesses over time.
You know, continuing to your tips around founders, and we have a few digital first companies over here, founders of those companies. What do you look into those companies? Like, I mean, you.
So we look for three very simple things when we look at a company that we want to partner with. The first is customer love. You either have it or you don't have it, right? And you can measure it quantitatively, you can measure it qualitatively, you can do all sorts of things, but you know whether you have it or you don't have it. That's number one. Number two is we look for founder quality, which is in our model, we work with founders for many, many years together. And therefore we look for founders who have the same vision as us, who have the same value set as us, who basically want to build a great business. And the third is we look for complementarity, which is what are you good at, what are we good at, and can we actually make that a multiplier as opposed to an additive thing, right? Actually, that's it. I mean, we do lots of analysis and research, but actually the reality is we look for these three things. If you boil it down, eventually when we say yes or no to something, right, we sort of ask ourselves these three questions. And if the answer to all three is yes, generally we do it.
And once, let's say, you decide to sort of invest or, you know, buy out the company, how does it work in terms of, let's say, culture, fit and all that? Right? I mean, there are so many software aspects that you would get played out.
I think the software aspects are everything, actually. So for us, the journey actually begins with the partnership, right, and the investment. So we do majority deals. So we do majority with a path to ownership over 5 years. Eventually, for founders who want to stay on beyond 5 years, they swap into Mensa equity and so on, right? But essentially, it's sort of a 5-year type partnership. The way a lot of the evaluation is done is also, by the way, for both parties to be comfortable with each other. It is not one way, right? While we are actually looking at the brand and saying, is this the right fit for us? Every brand founder that I've sort of met is also doing the same, to say, are we actually the right, you know, are we going to be okay? Because I tell every founder that I meet, your day-to-day matters more than your end state valuation. If you actually get into something and you just dislike the day-to-day dramatically, right, no amount of money at the end of the day is going to be worth it. So we actually do a lot of culture assessment as we go through on both sides. And by the way, our conversion rate, which is, I have now met, I don't know, Nilesh and Siddharth, we would have met 700, 800 founders, maybe 800. I would have personally met 800 founders in the last 13 months, right? And we have 21, 22 partnerships. And so there's a conversion, right? And that conversion is actually on these three factors, right? And so we actually want to make sure we get it right. And touch wood, so far, we feel like we've gotten it mostly right. Our brands are growing quite dramatically. I'm quite proud of many of the brands and how they're actually being built, because I think they're products that people really like, right? Actually, by the way, since everybody knew Myntra, this is going to be a harder test, but I'm going to still try. How many of you know Villain as a brand? 3, okay. 4, okay. How many of you know Pebble as a brand, which is consumer electronics? Okay, not bad. Okay. How many of you know Karagiri as a brand? Saris. Not bad, actually. There's like one person who knew this. Okay. So I think each of these brands, just from this, means, by the way, there's 10x growth ahead of every brand, right? So the brands that we're building, we're not building labels. We're building brands. And the difference between the two is you're consistent over time as a brand, and the brand has a certain purpose. So that's what we sort of try and build. And therefore, by the way, going back to your question of founder and culture fit, if you have the same shared vision of what the brand will grow up to be, most of the friction goes away, because you basically have the same sort of goal at the end of the day. And by the way, if you don't have disagreements, you don't make good decisions. So it's good to have disagreements. It's good to have fights about what you want to try and do.
What do you think is, in the scope for Indian brands to grow global? Do you think there is any?
I think it's huge. I think, by the way, the next 10 years, you will see a bunch of brands from India that become global. But if you remember the stat of less than 30 brands being 100 million, there are less than 10 brands in this space that actually have any global presence. It's ridiculous. I mean, you think about it. You take beauty, you take fashion as just the two big ones, in home. India, by the way, is probably among the largest manufacturers of textiles anywhere. So you go to any H&M, you go to Zara, all of it is made in India, Bangladesh. You know, if it's lingerie, it's Sri Lanka. It's all here, right, Vietnam. But we don't build brands. I think this has to change, and change dramatically. I think we have a once in a decade opportunity to build global brands out of India. I think the easy way is to build it on Amazon. The more difficult way is to build it on your own D2C and offline. And I think we are very excited about both, right? Villain has started selling very well in the Middle East. There's an oud perfume that's starting to sell very well. We actually have our sari brand, Karagiri, which is now selling in the US quite nicely. I think there's a huge opportunity to go global for Indian brands and build truly global brands that go away from just being Indian, right? I mean, you can actually build brands that go across anything, right?
I'll probably come to the last question, and we'll post that. We'll open up the floor. But since you talk in threes, and we also think in threes, which is very interesting. Any piece of advice, or let's say 3 pieces of advice to Indian / even like some of our global partners, immersing in India, scaling in India. What would you sort of tell them if you were to give like 3?
So advice for building businesses in India, roughly, yeah. I think the first is really solve a genuine consumer problem, right, and build a product. It seems very basic, but just build, it's just important to solve a real problem that's actually genuinely either a consumer pain point or a consumer delight. Both are okay, but you have to solve that. I think that's number 1. I think number 2 is pick a large market. I don't know why people don't do it, right? I mean, if you, for example, I don't know, right? I mean, you pick, I'm trying to make sure I give an example that doesn't offend anybody, but, I don't know, right? Like pick laptop cases that fit only some particular kind of laptop in one particular area, right? I mean, your market size, if you're wildly successful, you'll build a 20 crore company, right? Don't do that. Pick at least a market where you have a chance to build a large business, because you're going to work equally hard, right? So you might as well pick a big problem, right? Especially in India. I think the third is just India is all about execution. It's about the day-to-day struggle. I mean, most people think about all the glamorous stuff and, here is your valuation and so on, right? It's immaterial. What matters is, by the way, whether you're making better pricing decisions every day. What matters is, are you working on consumer product quality every day and making it slightly better? What matters is your consumer experience and your warehouse operations getting. So I think India is all about just sort of getting better every day on consumers, right? So this is more consumer oriented than sort of B2B SaaS companies and so on, where I think there's a massive opportunity, but it's a whole different conversation. But if you're building a consumer company in India, great products and consumer delight, large market, and focus on day-to-day execution. I think if you just do these 3 things, and compounding is a wonderful thing, right? You grow at 25% year on year, you grow for 10 years, you're in great shape, right? The key is not to die, and keep compounding, right? If you do just those two things in a large space, I think you'll build a great business.
Interesting point about execution that you mentioned, because we always tell our global partners, like we're sitting out of San Francisco, New York, wherever, and then they'll say, we tell them that India suffers from superficial market entry syndrome. It's like they would run a performance campaign out of wherever, and it's very easy to get like the first million users.
Yep.
But only when you like sort of enter and scratch the surface,
Yes.
you will see the complexities that are building up, and that's how we have sort of thought about TimesPress as a model. But I think you're right, absolutely. Like execution is the
key, and you have to be on the ground. I think you can't sort of remote manage this from somewhere else, right? So
awesome, great. So should we open up some?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Yep.
From whatever I've read, I know that you're acquiring brands that are typically doing well digitally. Are you also planning to launch a platform, Mensa, for like the brands that kind of roll up into Mensa, or still relying at distribution at the marketplace? So
I think for now, the answer is we're relying on distribution in the marketplaces, our own D2C and offline. Right, and I think the reason is, I think you have to know what you're good at. Actually, not what you're good at, what you're going to be focused on. You're going to be good at anything. I think running a marketplace requires very different set of skill sets, and running brands requires very different set of skill sets. So I think we are very focused on building brands, and so there's no intent to sell on Mensa.com. I think the answer is there'll be a Karagiri, there'll be a X, there'll be a Y, right? I think that's what we're trying to do.
You mentioned about purpose, and you also mentioned you work with 24 founders.
Right.
And of course, they're going to increase in the near future. How do you, and purpose changes over time.
Yes.
Like purpose changes over time.
Yes.
How do you make sure, and also building purpose comes at a cost.
Yes.
Right? So because if it's a business at a nascent stage, purpose is taking away the cost, which is always currently evolving. And possibly people who are working on it not experience life as much as you do.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you're building that purpose in continuously, because you mentioned that's a prerequisite to building good brand?
Yeah. No, I think it's a terrific question. I think firstly, by the way, I have a slight disagreement. I think purpose doesn't change dramatically over time if you define it correctly. It's a little bit of the difference between a vision and a mission, right? I think, if you're trying to, make a sari cool again, right? I think as an overall mission, maybe you'll go from saris to something else, to jewelry, to whatever, right? But the reality is, I think many elements of this remain constant. So I think that's number one. Number two is, remember that purpose has to appeal to the audience. And actually, by the way, many of the founders have a much deeper connect with the consumer and what they want. So therefore, listening to them quite carefully, as well as to the customers, is quite important in defining it, right? And I think the third is, the way I think about it is you run the business at various frequencies. So a category launch, a new category launch, and therefore changing the purpose happens once every 6 months. Changing a style happens every month. Changing pricing happens every day, right? And changing the brand itself happens once every 5 years. So you have to sort of play the sort of long game, right? Brand building is a 10-year game. The key is not to try and do everything in day one. And so that's a little bit of how we operate. Sorry, long-winded answer, but that's how we think about it, right? Yep.
I noticed that you mentioned fashion, beauty and home as categories. They're promising. Very curious to hear your views on food. Categories. You have enough food brands. Right. There must be certain challenges to it. And health, because you have literally into the journey.
Right. No, great question. So I don't think we'll stop with fashion, beauty and home. The reason we picked fashion and beauty and home is, firstly, by the way, it's the largest chunk of the market. So if you look at $1 trillion retail market in India, $120 odd billion is fashion, beauty and home. The bigger one, of course, is food, right? If you take fresh and package, it's much, much larger. So that's one. That's why we picked this, and it's high gross margin and so on, and you can build a brand. Now, if I think about food, I think there are two different kinds, right? I think it's a very interesting market. I think fresh food is very, very different from packaged food, right? And they're two very, very different models, business models, right? One goes into cloud kitchen, logistics, optimization, and the other goes into brand building. So would we be open to food? The answer is probably yes, maybe not fresh. However, if you think about food, right, the complexities suddenly go up dramatically. Regulatory complexities, right, go up. If you ship out a wrong shoe, nobody cares, right? If you ship out wrong food, I mean, there's a problem, right? So the cost of a mistake goes up dramatically, and therefore, by the way, operating systems need to be built that way. Second is shelf life starts to make a big difference, because again, you have to do inventory planning very, very differently, right? So I think food's a very interesting category. I think we'll eventually get to it. For now, we're focused on the others. On the other hand, on health, I believe nutraceuticals is a massive play, and I think we will get into it. Because it's actually very close to building brands, it's building habits, and I think it's a vast untapped space. There is no GNC equivalent in India at this point, and I think there is a space and a brand to be built there, I think. Especially given the amount of excess nutraceutical manufacturing capacity and pharma manufacturing capacity that exists in this country, we can formulate almost anything at reasonably good quality. So I think there is a brand waiting to be done in nutraceuticals. Yep.
And you talked about how content and community is the future of brand building.
Yeah.
How you can't pay your way into it. So just really curious on the brands that you engage with. What have you seen working for them? Like, what's the common thing that they do really well to get that content and community part right?
Yeah. I mean, on a lighter note, you can pay for it, just as expensive. You can get there. I mean, I think across Myntra and MedLife, we probably spend more performance marketing money than most others in acquiring customers. So it is possible, I think. I think 2-3 things work in community. I think the first is being authentic in some ways in terms of messaging to the brand. I think that helps. And what do I mean by that? I think the content has to mean something. So I'll give you an example which is non-Mensa, right? Actually, I'll give you a Mensa example. A Mensa example is, Karagiri again I'll pick, which is the sari brand. It was started by Pallavi. Pallavi is from Pune. Her grandfather was a weaver, right? She has a direct connect with 2,500 weavers. I mean, she actually goes and visits. Part of the profits actually get plowed back into weaver children education, etc. Right? I mean, the way they think about it. Now, that's a very authentic sort of way of operating because you believe it. And then, by the way, if your social media and your content and community reflect that, that's a lot easier because I think people pick up bullshit very quickly, right? You know the difference between paid marketing and authentic marketing very, very easily, right? And I think the key is to sort of blur the lines. I mean, you have to put some money behind some things, but the question is how do you do it? I think that's number one. I think number two is, I think you could be very clever about how to put money behind what and how to make it travel. And I think there is more and more science to how you do this, as opposed to, even 2-3 years earlier, where I think it was a lot more, you found the influencer, they got 5 posts and, hopefully it worked. I think that's now changing dramatically because I think people are now putting a lot more tech behind it, a lot more understanding of actually impressions, click-through rates, and you can do it more algorithmically than you did before. So I think these are the 2 things that I've seen work quite well. Yep.
So I think Viren and you had briefly touched upon this during the chat, but just wanted to know more. So there's always this palpable tension sort of between performance marketing and brand marketing.
Right.
No,
come on. There's no tension.
Most of our digital first businesses, right, where you are less patient, early stage, and you want to see a bang for buck early on for every penny that you spend on marketing. So first off, what is your take as a mentor to these brands, especially in the brand building space? And how do you think founders are thinking about it? Like, are they able to see the long-term value in brand marketing?
Yeah, I think they're terrific. It's a terrific question. I'll answer it first from Mensa and then just general advice, right? On the Mensa side, I actually separate the two out. So, we're a 1,500 crore business, right? You take 2-3% out. It's a fairly large number. And you put that aside because we're actually making money, right? And you basically say this is a different pocket of money. It's for brand marketing. You then decide on capital allocation of how it goes. You don't obviously evenly spread it out across 21 brands. You put it against 2-3 brands which I think have the most promise or the best ideas or whatever else, right? So the way we do it is we separate out brand and performance. And I think performance, by the way, is very mathematical, right? You have a ROAS and you have a total cost of sales and you figure out whether that works or doesn't work and you keep trying. So we separate the two out, and I think quite honestly it's a luxury. The luxury that we have is because we make money. Taking, you're at X% EBITDA, X minus 2% EBITDA is okay, right? And therefore you're able to put that money aside, right? And that's how we do it. I think it depends on the stage of the brand. So the way I would answer your second question on what should founders do, I think if you're less than 20 crores, don't do brand, let the product speak for itself, right? And the product quality and the and the repeat rates should build the brand, right? You can't build it, right? That's, by the way, you just build it on word of mouth, little bit of performance marketing, no brand marketing, right? 20 to 70 crores, in my view, start to do performance marketing, lots, and make sure ROAS works. Do a little bit of digital brand building. Maybe 5% of what your total marketing spend is. You start to spend a little bit, but still let your product speak for itself. From 70 to 200 crores, you then start to spend a lot more because you want to, at that point, by the way, also the Google and Facebook incentives are inverted. The larger you get, the more you pay, right? Therefore, you need to get large brands to start having brand searches, and for that to actually work. So the way you sort of think about that is you basically at 70 to 200 crores start to want to create pull for a brand, right? And then therefore you start to spend more on brand. 200 and above, you spend on anything you want to do if you're profitable.
But do you think brand building?
And spend it on the Times Group. No, just kidding.
Do you think the brand building obviously has certain long-term value? Like, is that
absolutely? So the reason brand building is important is your cost of customer acquisition goes down if a large percentage of your traffic is organic, right? And therefore, by the way, going from push to pull is important. If 30% of your traffic happens organically, then you're not paying CAC for that. And that's eventually what the brand is about, right? And the brand, I think, over time leads to repeats and leads to lower cost of customer acquisition, and it's therefore a direct business impact.
Right, that's great. Any more questions?
Right, so how important is sustainability and circular economy in the brands that you see? That is one. And second thing is, going forward, do you see a larger chunk of Indian consumers actually paying for more sustainable products?
Do you want a politically correct answer? Do you want a real answer? Look, I mean, yes, I think sustainability is important. And I think over time, brands need to do more, right, in terms of sustainability. I think you actually have to start with much simpler things, which is the way a product gets transported between where it gets made to a warehouse to when it gets to a customer. I think you can reduce your footprint and your sustainability dramatically. I think that's the single easiest thing to do, right? And I think that's the easy part. Now, to create truly sustainable brands over time, I think is just very difficult. Today in India, the short answer is very few people are willing to pay a premium for a green product or a sustainable product. I think very, very few. It must be people in BIC and so on. But outside of that, it's very hard actually to find people who will pay for it. Therefore, by the way, you have to create value and actually have to cost engineer the product so that the cost of green doesn't cost the customer. And that is very hard as a problem to solve, right? And I think that will take many, many years to solve the problem. Okay, yeah.
So full disclosure, I am a content marketing startup. So one of the challenges we face here is to kind of take this conversation forward is when people are progressing from being heavy on performance marketing to doing more brand. There is a focus on immediate ROI.
Yes.
No content can deliver in the short run. The analytics the way performance can, right? So some people get it, but a lot of people need to be convinced that it's sometimes just frankly a bit of a show. I'm just trying to figure out how to kind of build that. I guess.
I don't think there was a question there. I think there was, however, a statement. I agree with your statement. I do think people should use more of your content marketing services. And sorry, just on a on a lighter note, by the way, I think again it goes a little bit back to the size of the business, right? See, if you are not profitable and you're small, it's very hard to say I want to do brand, right? Just very hard. I think it goes back again to sustainability. If you can make 10% EBITDA margin, great. You can spend 3% of it. If you're making -5, you don't have money. So I think that's a bit of the problem, right? And I think really, genuinely, I feel people who are going to start now or start up now, focus on the bloody product. Make the product great. Make sure people buy the product for the product. Then you worry about performance marketing. People are spending more on performance marketing than COGS, right? I mean, at some level, this has to stop, right? I mean, the only people getting richer are Facebook and Google, which I think are already quite rich anyway, right? Yeah.
So, a year ago, a lot of B2C founders were saying that it's easier for them to fight with Unilever of the world.
Sorry, fight with what?
Fight with the Unilever of the world. In a 15-inch surface screen than a 1500 square feet of kirana store and supermarkets. but now consumers are going back to supermarkets.
Right.
What is your thoughts on that?
So I think offline is never going to go away. I've been saying this all through, right? My belief is India is today 93% offline, 7% online. Maybe it'll become 80-20, right, in 10 years. I don't think offline is going to go away. I think you have to make, if you're a brand owner, you have to be where the customer is, depending on who your customer, right? So I don't think it matters whether you're this thing or not. Second, India is mostly unbranded. Therefore, by the way, I mean, maybe you can't become a Unilever, right? But I think certainly there is more brands to be had. So you're not fighting a Unilever. You're moving customers from unbranded to branded. So it's a very different play, in my view.
So in a way, I think this is the supply chain nowadays, because as you said, like most of the brands are getting the products anyways from India, Sri Lanka, things like that.
Right.
Now that we are trying to build a brand in India, because in a way, I think not disrupting the existing supply chain, and how do we show that we're not antagonizing the big brothers?
I mean, I don't care if I antagonize the big business, firstly. I'm just building my business, right? No, so the way I would sort of think about it is, look, it's not like manufacturing capacity is fully utilized. If you take manufacturing capacity utilization in the country for textile mills, it's actually pretty poor, right? So there is a lot of excess capacity across, and therefore you're not taking anything away. You're actually utilizing assets better. I think that's point number one. Point number two is also manufacturing capacity is not a constant. If there's enough demand and consumption continues to go up, people will invest capex into the business, right? So I don't think you're taking anything away from the global supply chains. However, I do think, by the way, global supply chains are very difficult in building global brands. I think our single largest difficulty is getting ships into the LA port, right? I mean, you wait for days and days and days to get a slot into Amazon. I think real supply chain problems are, I think, more the issue than I think manufacturing related supply chain.
All right, I think we are done. Thank you so much, Ananth. Really pleasure having you, and thank you for a 45-minute, I think it's a full-time MBA course that we completed.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Sure.